So namaste, everyone. We are just waiting for Nandana to join us, and there she is. So namaste, Nandana.
Hi.
Greetings and a good morning to you in your part of the world. It's a good evening over here, and we have several people who have joined us on Facebook Live who are looking forward to learning from you and from the insights from your books. So welcome to the Author Experience Conversations, where we have cool conversations with inspiring authors like you every week. So welcome to the Author Experience Conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we are we are very happy to host all our people who have joined on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining in. And we are here to discuss Nandana's book today called Acrobat, which is poems translated by Nandana, poems written by her mother Nabanita Dev Sen, and who is a prolific writer, having started writing books of poems at the age of 21, and she's won several awards for her writing work, for her literary work, including the Padma Shri, the Sahitya Academy Award, the Bangla Academy Lifetime Achievement Award, and the award Lifetime Achievement Award of the Publishers and Booksellers Guild. And her legacy is her work of poetry, which she writes in the very first introduction book, that I was conceived in the womb of one poet and sired by another. Poetry, I suspect, was ruling my stars from the very first moment of my being. I had no way of avoiding its grips. And I think that legacy continues because Nandana also is a prolific writer, besides being an actor and an activist. And she's written 6 children books and many more to come. And of course, Acrobat, which is the latest book, which was recently launched in India. So welcome once again, Nandana.
Thank you so much. This is a lovely beginning to my Sunday here in New York.
You're welcome. And to begin with, since we're dedicating this to your mom, the late Nabanita Dev Sen, let's begin with a small video about Nabanita.
Lovely.
So that's a small tribute montages of your mom and you. So Nandana, to begin with, there's a poem that I picked from the book, which is all about being. And there were some poems that really touched me because, as a life coach, as a leadership coach, we work a lot on the entire concept of ontology, which is who am I truly, right? And this poem touched me because it's about piecing together many small lies. A great big truth takes shape. That truth crushes all other truths into a lie. That lie is now life. And the science of ontology is based on one simple question: who am I? And whenever I ask this question in several leadership workshops or in training programs that I conduct, very few people can actually answer that question. And in psychological studies, we have a tool called the Johari window, which actually tells you about how feedback is very important for human beings to truly, create self-awareness. So if I had to ask you, Nandana, and this is the icebreaker, the warming up session, if I had to ask you to define Nandana Sen, the individual, take away all those titles and roles as actor, activist, author, and all that you do, and just 7 descriptors to define Nandana as an individual, as a person. 7 descriptors could be values, principles, roles, responsibilities, adverbs, adjectives, nouns, pronouns, whatever defines you. And it could be one word or a set of words. So what would those 7 descriptors be?
Mother, daughter, wife, advocate, artist, and playmate.
Playmate.
Hmm.
Okay. So that's 6.
Oh, one more.
Yes.
Uh,
I'm
um,
counting.
I can see. Friend.
Friend. And how would you kind of unpack this concept of advocate and playmate?
I think the advocacy, especially for children's rights, has been a huge part of my life from when I was not much older than a child myself. I started working for child protection when I was living in India as a young teenager. So I think the violence against children and exploitation of children um, are, in my understanding and my opinion, the two biggest crises in the world, and it's a huge um, it's a crisis of epidemic proportions in India. So child abuse is something that I have fought against for most of my
Right.
life. I think a lot of my advocacy
Right.
with that, but it also has to do with girl child education. It has to do with ending human trafficking. It has to do with ending child marriage, which are all kind of issues that are connected to the question of child protection.
Right.
Um, but I'm also an advocate for freedom of expression. I'm an advocate for religious tolerance. I mean, so, and all of these sorts of advocacies have kind of been reflected in the choices that I've made as an artist. So when I said advocate and artist, they're actually very connected,
Connected.
because
Yes.
both in terms of the choices I've made, of the films I've done as an actor, or the books that I've written as an author, have come out of this commitment that I have to advocacy.
Right. Brilliant. And playmate. What is the thought behind the playmate part?
That I'm very silly. There's a part of me that's really silly, and one of the reasons why I love being a children's writer, a big part of it is my commitment to child protection, but another part of it is just the fact that I love to play, and I love to play with kids. I love to play with my adult friends, and by that I don't mean play as in, tease. I mean play as in sort of getting down to the business of just having fun and playing, being silly, whether you're being silly with words, whether you're being silly in the playground, whether you're being silly in a workshop with children. I think it's really important for us. We we forget the importance of play. We forget
Right.
the importance of
Right.
being silly in our lives.
Right.
And I have to say, since this is about my mother and I had a very playful relationship. We also had a very intense, emotional, and uninhibited relationship. Was
Right.
very profound.
Right.
But beyond that, we loved playing together. We would have these long extemporaneous conversations in rhyme, because she loved rhyming, and I was never as good as she was, but it was something that I also loved to do. So we would just do these that's just an example. We would have these conversations, normal conversations about day-to-day life. Are we going to eat? What homework are you going to do? But we would do it in rhyme, to give you an example of how much play you can bring into your day-to-day life in
Very
ways that
nice. I like
make
that.
living a little bit more fun, which we
Right.
don't often do enough.
Right.
So that's yeah, that's what I meant as.
And that's excellent. I'm very happy that you unpacked that so brilliantly, because in my book, which is a self-help series called Mojo's Inspirator, uh,
Mhm.
we've actually taken this concept, which is the jargon used in a lot of corporate organizations and other organizations, what they call as work-life balance. And I've never liked that concept. And in our book, we've kind of tweaked it, and we said it's life, play, work balance, because work cannot come first. Work is a small part of life, right? Especially the kind of work you do as an employee, right? And we say if you're not on top of life and life has kind of suppressed you, then there's no way you can be productive at work. So life comes first. Play is very important because all work and no play makes Jerry a dull boy, makes Nandana a dull girl, right? So if you're not playing and if you're not having fun, you can't be highly
That's
productive and
right.
highly energetic. So
Absolutely.
so and that's the reason the work comes last in the life play work balance.
Yeah,
And
except that in some cases, like in my case, I feel like my work is so connected to my life and also my need for play
true,
that they're not, but I completely understand. I think if I worked at, for
right.
instance, as a
So
publisher, as an editor for years in a publishing company,
no,
and in that
and I'm
case,
completely
it was
agreeing
very,
with you because very few are fortunate like you and me to do what they love, because
yeah,
then you're never working for a single day in your life, like Confucius said. But
right.
unfortunately, that does not hold for true for 85% of people who come to jobs worldwide and hate their jobs, because of toxic managers and toxicity in the workplace. So that's why life play work. But I completely get what you're saying, because you've been doing something that you love. You've been driven by passion. So, the way I want to break this conversation is that I want to break it into three parts. First is the early years, the shaping of Nandana Sen, the person, the being which you just described so beautifully with the seven descriptors. The second would be your work as an artist, an actor, an author, and an activist. And the third would be more about the book Acrobat and what inspired you to write that book and the other books that you've written. Is that fine? So
That's
to begin with, I mean, I've read the letter that you've written to your mom in the book, and I can see that there's a huge influence that she's had in your life.
right.
So, what was the influence that she has had in the choices that you made, and how does that influence your writing, and how did that shape your early years? Do you want to share some of that with the audience?
Oh, I mean, I think she influenced practically every decision I made, I think. Every major life decision, I should say. And sometimes, sometimes we had to kind of make those decisions together. Sometimes we were not always in agreement and we had to negotiate that. But basically, I grew up in a house of four females, and all female. I was going to say four women, but we were children. So my sister, Antara, my Didi, my older sister, me, my grandmother, Radharani Devi, who was also a very beloved poet, and my mother. And so I think growing up in an all-female family freed you up in ways that you didn't even realize at the time. You never felt that being a girl was an impediment in any way. Um, and so we really grew up feeling completely what should I say, unrestrained in terms of the choices that we may want to, unrestrained by our gender, I should say, not necessarily unrestrained by the reality of the world, but and then the other thing that was unique about the way I grew up was that we grew up in a house full of books, full of poetry. My mother had been born in this house, Bhalobasha Bari, which was a very famous, still is a very famous kind of literary institution in Kolkata, a place where when my mother was growing up, both her parents, her grandfather, her father was also a poet, Narendra Dev. So the Bhalobasha Bari was the home of literary soirees and kavi sammelans, poetry readings and spontaneous Tagore concerts by people like, Hemanto Mukhopadhyay uh, and singers like, there were so many artists who were sort of sparkling parts of Kolkata who kind of gathered in this house. And my mother continued that tradition when she went back to India and started living in Bhalobasha Badi with us. So, the first time I heard Baul songs was from Purnadash Baul at our giving a concert at our house, for instance. So it was very culturally alive. It was very full of poetry. It was very literary, so much so that we loved literature. I loved poetry, but I also took poetry for granted. It was not a sort of unique thing in my life. It was a central thing in my life. But in the same way that you take your family for granted, where you love them, so you never question the unconditional love you have for them, you also take them for granted in that you assume that you understand everything about them, and this is always going to be a part of your life, even if you don't work to keep it in your life. And as I've grown up, and also as I did this book, I realized that there was so much of so many of the things that I understood, including the intimacy that I felt with my mother, and the intimacy that I felt with my mother tongue, with Bangla, as well as the intimacy I felt with my mother's poetry. All of those things were challenged in a way while I was doing acrobat. But I can come back to that. But just to say, poetry and literature, books were a huge part of our lives.
Right.
My mother and my grandmother were both early feminists. So we grew, my grandmother was an early feminist. My mother was very much one of the strong feminist voices of her time, and of any time in India. And so that became a big part of, I think, the choices that I made. And I don't think it's a coincidence that every protagonist of all my books is a girl. And that's because not in most, to this day, most heroes, most protagonists in children's books are boys. They're not girls. And the interesting thing is that girls will read books that have male protagonists, but boys will not read books that have girl protagonists. So writers end up doing the safe thing. So, I mean, I could go on and on, but there were so many choices that I made that I'm sure had a lot to do with the way I was growing up. The final thing I would say, which is probably the most important thing, is that my mother was very uninhibited in the way she expressed herself. She was extremely honest in her writing, both in her poetry. Her poetry was honest in a very visceral, kind of raw, almost heartbreaking way. And her prose was very lighthearted, but equally true. She basically opened the doors of the world.
Right. Yes, I could see that in the poems. Yeah.
Yes, and invited the world into her life, which looked on the surface to be this dysfunctional, broken family, but actually was a very fun-loving, all-female family of eccentrics, right? And she wrote about it with so much self-deprecating irony and irreverent honesty, and also laugh out loud humor, that she became immediately really beloved. So she was very honest in everything that she wrote, and that was unique to her, because a lot of time writers have a different personality in life than they have in their art, than they have in their writing. But in my mother's case, it was not like that, and she was absolutely she would laugh and cry and scold us and cuddle us and advocate, rally, argue with the world, and apologize when she thought she needed to. She was amazingly open emotionally, and because I grew up with her, I think I grew up never feeling embarrassed by my own emotions, never feeling like I had to apologize for what I felt. At the same time, I felt it was really important to be true to what I felt and to express what I felt honestly, and not to find a kind of different or twisted interpretation of what I was feeling. It sounds like a simple thing, but it's not very easy. We have so many layers.
Yes, I know.
We want to read, and that poem that you chose about the lie, called Life, is very much about that. We are the world teaches you to find different ways of interpreting troubling experiences you have, whether it's by blaming someone else, or whether it's by putting on a brave face where you really don't want to. You really want to say it's shitty, but you feel like you have to say, oh, it's a great day, whatever it may be, or the opposite of that, right? So I think she was someone who taught us to just be able to recognize our feelings, to understand my emotions for what they were, and to articulate them with as much accuracy and honesty as I could. And that, I think, is the biggest gift about, the others too, but I think that is something that I'm trying to teach my daughter. That's something that I hope into all the work that I do.
Right. Yeah. And then, whatever you spoke, there's some brilliant life lessons over there, because in leadership learning circles, we actually call it persona. In psychological studies, it's called persona, the mask that people wear. Persona in Latin means mask. And because people are not ready to own responsibility for their own lives, they suffer from what is called as the victim mindset. And this all can be actually kind of, addressed by learning how to be emotionally intelligent, which is exactly what you spoke about. Being emotionally intelligent, which is about having huge self-awareness. A lot of people take a lot of time trying to find those descriptors which would define them. For you, it was so easy to kind of, just give those seven in a
It was
sequence.
easy. I was completely unprepared for it. If you
Yes, yeah.
were going to ask me those questions, I would have come up with more clever answers, I'm
No,
sure.
I think you came up with the most brilliant answers, because most people forget their most important roles like mother, daughter, wife, and they talk about everything else, about being a speaker, writer, this, but they forget the most important roles, because, like you said, we take our near and dear ones for granted, right? And I come back to this poem, which was written by a mother in a book, in the introduction piece. I was conceived in the womb of one poet and sired by another. And that was her inheritance. You also have a mother who's a prolific writer and a poet. And at the same time, you have a father who's a well-known economist and a writer himself. So how did he influence your early years in your life? We're
I've
talking
always
about Dr. Amartya Sen for the uninitiated. So, yes.
yeah, so if you're talking about my mother's book, we should also that is my dad's book, it's
Right,
a beautiful
right,
book that just came out about his life. So I've all my life I've been tremendously proud of both my parents.
right.
People often ask me, did you feel any kind of a pressure because both your parents were so, famous, etc. And the truth is that I didn't, and part of it has to do with the way they were. I didn't feel any pressure because I didn't feel any pressure from them. Um, at the same time, I also didn't feel for whatever reason, I don't know why, I always had a lot of confidence in my ability to be able to change my life around a few times, which I've done. I've had different careers that to an outsider may seem like they have nothing to do with each other, but the way they happened in my life were very organic and they're very much interconnected. But I think there was a lot of confidence that I got. I think it must be because of the way I was brought up. Now, I didn't grow up with my dad because my parents actually separated when I was really young, which
Right.
is why I grew up in this all-female family with my grandmother and my mother and my sister. But my dad and I were always very close. We always, we saw each other several times a year. If my special language with my mother was poetry, my special language with my father was riddles. So I actually did one of the books that I did that I didn't put up here. This book is dedicated to my mother, and I'll talk about it in a moment because she helped me. She translated this with me. But I actually dedicated a book to my father too, called Talkie Tumble of Jumble Farm, which is about solving riddles, word puzzles, because we spent a lot of time solving math puzzles, word puzzles, logic puzzles. And that was sort of our language of having fun, of playing together. So I think although they're extremely different as individuals, there are some, they're very similar in some ways. For instance, their strong commitment to social justice, my
Right,
mother's and
right.
father. I can't tell you how much of an impact that has made on the shape that my life has taken, and the choices that I have made at various crossroads at various points in my life. Um, so it's it's a very and also he was, both my parents, another thing that was really touching is that they were very excited about my film work. I think they were, apprehensive about it initially, not to the point of ever saying, no, don't do this. But they were like, oh, but, you're such a bookish girl. How are you going to fit into this world? You've been a nerd all your life, but, and, but they've always been so supportive of it. So, when my first film, which was a film that was directed by Gautam Ghosh, it officially premiered at the Cannes Film Festival many years ago, after a period of, I think, 20 years of there being no film from India that was officially selected. And I flew from New York. My mother flew from India. My dad flew from, I think he was in England at that time. Oh no, actually he was in Boston. And they were all there for my film premiere at Cannes Festival. And, you know, my dad never thought that he would be walking down the croisette and having drinks in the sort of, you know, at the famous Cannes hotels, etc. And he lived, it was just amazing for me to see these two pretty formidable academics kind of slip into the role that they needed to slip into when they were there as the mother of the actress. And they did that with multiple times. They came to the London Film Festival for Rang Rasiya. They came to my theater performances on Broadway and in the Prithvi Theater in sorry, Broadway performances in New York and Prithvi Theater in Bombay. And they came to the Toronto Film Festival. You know, they've been there for me. Two extremely busy people in whose life films didn't really feature much made that. And it was very touching. When I think about it, it was just so lovely to have that support. And I think whatever it is that made them that supportive as parents is what gave me, even as a child, the confidence that has always driven my choices. I think also the other thing that I got from both of them at a young age was the importance of taking responsibility for your actions.
Right.
The importance of taking responsibility for what you say.
Absolutely.
So therefore, understanding that even a little person had a big agency to change the world, to make a difference.
True.
And I really believe that as a child, I had a voice that mattered. And I think that in turn, I'm sure, impacted many of the decisions and life choices I made.
Absolutely. And it's all about having integrity, right? What you're speaking about, which, you know, before we move to the next segment, it brings me to this poem, which is one of the poems in the book Acrobat, which is dedicated to you by your mom. And it's called Puppet to Nandana. What is the thought behind this poem? How do you interpret it, and how should one unpack this? It's a very powerful poem, and it's raw, like you said, and
since you asked me to, let me read it actually.
Yes.
I can't decide. Was it a mistake, or is it better this way? Twice now, pretending to be a goddess, I've created humans out of my desire. Funnily though, that's where the fake goddess act ends. After that, you revert to being a woman as before. Good and bad, dreams, sorrow. It's all beyond your will again. So the puppet's dance will resume once more on a string. Practice makes perfect. Always do your best. I look into the mirror. Do I know this face? Somewhere it lies hidden, that secret divine will. Or was it just a momentary spark, the celestial celebration of an instant, an act of pity by a humorist in the background? I think there's another line there that got cut off, but that's okay. But let me see if I can find it here. You know, I think the poem is, I think I understood, even though this poem I knew all my life because it was dedicated to me and it was written literally like a day after I was born. I'm going to find this poem, 83. So, yeah. So but I don't think I understood it until I yeah. So here, the last line of the poem is, I'll just.
It's a very profound and a very deep poem, and that's why I wanted to understand your interpretation. You know, I've just completed a book called Weekends with Zoe, where I have several of my favorite poems which I have taken in the book and interpreted them. And I connect this poem that you just read out to a favorite poem of mine called The Man in the Glass or The Man in the Mirror. With all due respect, it's supposed to be like for all human beings, you know, that are you truly the person who you see in the mirror? Are you wearing those masks? And that's why I wanted you to, unpack it.
Yeah, and I put this in a section that's called "Do I Know This Face?" So this whole section is about
absolutely
your identity. So the way it ends, which was not included there, was Or was it just a momentary spark, the celestial celebration of an instant, an act of pity by a humorist in the background, this cloud bursting supernatural light? That was the last line that was missing. I wanted to read. And the reason why it's important is that I think this poem in some ways talks about the fact that you feel like a superhero when you become a mother.
Right.
You feel invincible. You've created life. You're responsible for life. You will take care of this delicate, fragile entity unconditionally all your life. It gives you a tremendous sense of in as I said, of invincibility. That nothing that you
Right.
have you have a superpower, and yet once you become a mother, you realize that actually you are bound. The options that you can exercise are limited. And there is so much. There are so many limits that are placed on your power, whether it's because of by some by your love, because there is fear when there is love.
Right.
Some by what the world expects. Some by what you need to do as because of your work. I mean, there. And also, I love these two lines where she, of course, that was fun to translate because in Bengali she uses a aponi pathete mon koroho nibesh, which is one of those lines that you hear as it's from a rhyme that's like a platitude, like a kind of, cliche, an aphorism that you hear growing up. Aponi pathete mon koroho nibesh, it's like it's an instruction that children hear listening, grow up listening about how important it is to concentrate on your studies. But it is a cliche. So how do you translate a cliche? It can't be a literal translation, right? You have to find something else that has the same sense of a banality. So I think what this poem is that your life as a motherhood can sometimes be taken over by things that are out of your control and by cliches. So it's what's unique about this poem is that it's both about the empowerment of the empowerment of motherhood, but also about the banality of the choices that you have to make as a mother, not of motherhood, but the choices that you are allowed to make as a mother. And the final thing I will say about this is that, my mother, you always see your mothers as unbreakable, right? And
right.
my mother
Absolutely.
especially had a very, she was very rambunctious in a lot of ways. She was very optimistic. She was very fun. She was always laughing. Even when we came back home from school hearing, when my parents broke up, the wife is always blamed, right? So even though in this case it was very clear cut,
Right.
my father eventually married someone else. It had nothing to do with my mother leaving my dad, but because at that time, even more so than now,
Right.
women were always blamed. I would hear these stories from home, and I would come home from school and I would come home very upset, and she would just
Yes.
laugh all of them off. She would just, she just made such light of it and fun of it that it couldn't stick to my heart as a heavy thing.
Right.
So I always thought she was, there was no anxiety in her about her motherhood. But of course there was. And there's a lot of poetry, many, many poems in which you see her anxiety about bringing this vulnerable life into a world that is not very safe or kind. And also the surprise, there's a part of her that was always a child. And this surprise of suddenly being a grown-up and being a mother, right? Like, how did the surprise of finding the world as having suddenly grown up around her, right?
Right.
That's also something that she says very beautifully in some of her poetry. And I have to say, even though I knew all those poems very well, it's only when I was translating it that they spoke so true to me. And perhaps that was because now I am a mother, and the anxiety of motherhood that I feel now, I understand so much better through her poetry, and I see it reflected in her poetry.
Great. Thank you for sharing all those thoughts with us, because like you said, I mean, the gift of motherhood has been bestowed upon the woman. And I always say this in women forums where I speak on women empowerment and gender rights, that men should never forget that they don't have that gift. So that power has been given to the woman. So if you think you're more powerful than women, you got the concept wrong. They don't need you as a knight in shining armor, because they are the knights in shining armor who give birth to us, right? Uh, so with that entire unpacking of Puppet, which is a poem from Acrobat, we move to your work. You studied literature and then you studied filmmaking, right?
Mhm.
And yet you chose to take up acting as a profession. What inspired you to become an actor? And I know you've done some brilliant cinema, which is especially in the space of what we call as public advocacy cinema, right?
Mhm.
Because we made the first movie on HIV/AIDS in India, dignity for people living with HIV, which was like the Philadelphia of India, called Ek Alag Mausam. And you've done movies to address the issues of of gay rights, of disability,
Mhm.
of religious tolerance. So, what inspired you to become an actor, and what were the choices that you made while selecting the movies, and what inspired you to take those roles, like the role you did in Black, or the other roles that you did to address gay rights, and uh, religious tolerance, which is all very close to your heart, and it's all related to social justice. So, what inspired you?
So, I always loved cinema as a medium. I believed and still believe that it is the most influential medium of communication. Although I love books, and I think the second most influential medium is children's books, because
Right.
you reach out to such a wide audience at a very impressionable age. So it's not a coincidence that my life revolves around two, that I feel is that I feel. Sorry, I have a 7-year-old daughter who's getting
Not to worry, not to
ready,
worry.
ready
Meghala,
for.
Meghala can come and say hi to everybody in the
Hold on
audience.
just a second, okay? I'll just mute you.
Hello, Meghala, how are you?
I'm so
No,
sorry.
not at all, not at all.
It's her ballet class now, so I usually take her and get her
Right,
ready. And
yeah, you did tell me, yes, yeah.
yes. So, um, sorry, where were we?
We
Oh, my.
were talking about the
So
inspiration,
I
about the
was,
choices you made
yeah,
for the several roles that
right,
are addressing social issues, yeah.
right. So the film, so becoming and being an actor, so film was not an accident in my life. I always loved it as a medium. That's why I decided to stop being a literary editor, because I had a lovely job, which I actually enjoyed very much, editing books at
Right.
Houghton Mifflin Company, editing wonderful books like the Riverside Shakespeare and the Best American Essays, and really wonderful, um, and beloved series. But I was so drawn to cinema, and during that time I'd been making short films, so I decided to go to film school at USC. And while I was at film school, I was visiting my mother one Christmas in between years, and my mother's friend, um, Gautam Ghosh, whom I'd known all my life, but he hadn't seen me in a few years because I was off to college studying and stuff. He was in the process of doing this film, really interesting film based on a Mahashweta Devi novel, Guria. And he wanted me to act in it. So I actually initially said, no, I don't want to be the actress in your film, because I've never thought of being an actress, but I have thought of being a director. So why don't you hire me as your assistant, And he said, no, I only see you as the lead in this film. So I went back, and then Gautam Da, being very clever, gave me a call and said, look, if you come back and agree to be the heroine in my movie, then you can also be my assistant. At that point,
Okay.
I had no idea that you can't possibly do both. So I said, yay, that's great. So I
Right.
came. And then, but the amazing thing is that the first day on the set, I just loved what I had to do as an actor, because it's not something I'd ever done before, which I'd always, in our families, we always used our brain to express ourselves. And we used our emotions to express ourselves through our poetry.
Right.
And we were quite open with each other emotionally, as I said. But to have to rely on your emotion uh, and to really have to connect with it in a public way was different for me, right? So it was difficult, it was challenging, it was fun, and I loved it. And then Cannes, this film went to Cannes and did very well, and so I suddenly had agents in New York and India and London, and I got very busy. Now the choices that I made, so you're right. All the films I mean, people have often asked me why, like that, they told me that they don't understand why I've said yes to certain films and no to other films, like why I declined certain roles, which anybody else would have loved to play, and accepted other roles that others may have hesitated about. Um, so that has to do, so I have always had an eccentric choice. It's very important for me to choose films that have a strong social or political consciousness. Um, and all of my films do, except for one, which was an action film. And I had always the secret fantasy of doing an action film because I'm
Right.
really clumsy. I'm really, really klutzy. And I thought, my God, if I did an action film miraculously, I would become really graceful. After that, I'd be able to walk in a straight line and do everything, you know, walk
Okay.
through open a glass door and not walk through it, all of these things that I've been doing all my life. But except for that, every single film of mine has had that core. So I chose Black, which was my first film in Bombay.
Right.
It's my
Right.
Bollywood film, so to speak. Actually,
So
my own
so
one.
Black was the film immediately after Gudia.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was, and that's as Bollywood as any of my films. I mean, most of them are sort of films that are made by producers who make Bollywood, directors who make Bollywood films, but are making a different kind of cinema, like like Sanjay Leela Bhansali doing
Right.
Hack, or Ketan Mehta doing Rag Rasiya, which was about
Right.
censorship. Um, so then, sorry, my daughter is having a little bit of a meltdown.
Not to worry.
Okay,
Yes.
hold on.
So those of you who have been listening, Nandana's book is available on Amazon. It's available at leading bookstores. You listened into some of the poems and poetry from the book Acrobat. Please do go and buy it at your favorite bookstore or on Amazon. And Nandana would be joining us again soon.
I'm sorry, my daughter, you can probably still hear her in the background.
Yes, I
She's
can. Yeah.
not wanting to go without me. But anyway, my husband has it under control. But we daughters, we can be very clingy. I was very clingy
Yeah.
to Jennifer.
Boys can be very clingy too. Yes. I guess that that kind of applies to all children. So yeah, you're talking about your movies about Black. There was a huge gap between Gudia and Black. Black, I think, released in 2003, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and Gudia
Was
released in
97 or 98?
98.
98.
Yeah. So I
Yes.
did a Canadian film. So that was my
Right.
first film here.
Yes,
But I
you
did
you
a
you worked in a
Canadian
lot of
film.
movies produced in Canada, UK, and the
Yeah,
US.
and I
Yeah.
lived it, yeah, and I did theater, and I was, so I was doing theater and I was doing films in New York and Canada, and I uh did a I wrote a film as well called Forever, which got filmed, that I acted in as well, which was a Canadian film called
Hmm.
Forever. There was a Canadian film called Seducing Maria that I did. I did a play called Modigliani on the New York stage. I did which was great. And then I did a film, wonderful film called The War Within,
Right.
which was a New York independent film about suicide bomber blowing up New York Grand Central Station. Meghna, what is it, baby? You want to come and say hi here? Come on, love. Do you want to come and say hi? Come here, baby. Come and say hi. Okay? I don't know why you're so... Oh my God. What is it? Why are you being so upset? 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 What's so upsetting? Can you tell me why you're so upset? I don't know. You don't know why you're so upset. Sometimes we don't know why we're upset. Sometimes we just feel upset. Okay, come, let's see Lekhika. Give me 1 minute. I'll be
Yeah,
back.
surely, surely.
Let's see. And we'll take you, we'll go see some, can you, who races? Let's see who goes first, you know. I think Abby's going to go first. Abby, are you going to go first, you know? I think you're going to go first. I think you're going to go first. Go, go, go. Daddy, race. Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. So sorry.
No, not at all.
There's
So,
a reason why that mother was the first thing
right.
of the identities, because
Right.
that is central. Anyway,
Right.
here I am, and she's gone to her ballet finally, so it's peaceful.
So you've done so much work in cinema, having, acted in movies made in Canada, in the US, in UK, in India, movies in English, Bengali, Hindi. Which is the role that you hold dearest to your heart? The one role, that one role. Which would
But
that be?
that's always a hard thing to say, to choose one role. But I think I mean, the three films that the roles, there are three roles that I really, really loved, and they're in three very different kinds of films. So one is the film that I was just telling you about, which is called The War Within, which did really well as an independent film here. And that was an early film about the um, rise of international terrorism and
Right.
religious intolerance, and the rise of and the effect of extraordinary renditions on otherwise peaceful Muslims, and how that was changing in the world. That was one. The Another one that I really loved is a Bengali one called Autograph, which I also wrote with my friend Srijit Mukherjee, which was inspired by a film by one of my favorite filmmakers, Shotyajit Ray, called Nayok. And that one was a wonderful character to play. I was playing an actress, but a very strong-willed, sharp-tongued, but good-hearted actress who has to make a choice. That's a moral decision, and has to choose success over doing the right thing. But it had many resonances with Bengali. It was full of Bengali poetry that I loved, and of course references to Ray. We shot it in Kolkata. It brought me back to Kolkata after a long time. And I worked with actors like whom I really loved, like Roshanjit. So that was lovely, and I loved what that film is about. Ethics in art. That's essentially what it is. So at what cost do you go after success, right? The ethics of the morality of the choices you make as an artist. The other film that I really love, and is also about art, and that's Rang Rasiya by
Right.
Ketan Mehta, and that's about freedom of expression,
Absolutely.
about censorship. And I feel, I mean, if I had to choose one film, I would probably choose that one, because I feel it is such an important topic in the world, because I think our freedom to express ourselves, whether as a journalist or
Which
as
is
an
surely,
artist.
slowly but surely getting stifled nowadays. Yeah.
Yes, it's shrinking more and more, I mean, all over the world, including India. And so at a time, and I mean, that film is now also several years old, and I think and what's interesting is that it was actually talking about religious intolerance in the early 1900s.
Right.
So it was kind of anticipating in a way what was then going to happen.
Right.
So, but it's also has the character I played had a very strong uh, feminist, what should I say? That's almost too academic a word, but it kind of shows the power and the helplessness of being a woman of a certain at a certain time, very, very beautifully. So it talks about how women become the casualties of all kinds of war.
Right.
So I loved playing that character because of that, because of
Right.
what the film stood for politically, but also as an actress, I loved, wearing those Navwari saris, spending an hour every day just getting into
Right.
it. And
All these.
I wore the real thing. I didn't do anything that was stitched up and that I stepped into like pants. I actually wore the whole thing every day. And, having my nose pin and having my waist chain and having my jhumkas and having my really long hair. I grew my hair for a couple of years for it. Plus, we even then added to that. So all of those things, I think the physicality of it, the emotionality of it, and the politicality of it, all those three things
Right.
made this
Right.
character very
And this
special.
was based on the life of Raja Ravi Verma. For people who have not seen the film, I would suggest you must see the film. It's a brilliant movie made by Ketan Mehta. Ketan
Yeah.
also produced a movie called Manji, produced and directed a movie called Manji. And Manji's story was Dashrath Manji, who was the person who inspired me to start something called the Karmavir Awards and start writing books of true
Yeah.
stories of real heroes. And I'll tell you more about that later. So, from your work as an actor to your work as an activist, and I've heard you using the word social justice at least thrice in the conversation today. And I founded something called the International Confederation of NGOs and started a global movement called the Joy of Giving. And around 2 years ago, a little before the pandemic, I actually spoke in a TED forum about why I find no joy in the joy of giving anymore, because it's become mindless charity. And the premise of the Joy of Giving movement always was that it is not mindless, arrogant charity that is wanting in our world, but mindful, humble social justice, which social justice translated into action is fairness, equality, and equal opportunity for people. So what inspired you, what inspired your activism and all the work that you do for child rights, the work that you do against trafficking, the work you're doing as an ambassador with Save the Children? Do you want to talk a little more about that?
What inspired me? I don't think it's one thing, it's life, right? It's the reality of growing up in Kolkata and seeing the inequities that surround you, the vulnerabilities of children, the enormous numbers of children who live on the streets, who don't have homes, who have no protection, who are exploited from a very young age. And even the fact that there were forms of exploitation that were considered okay, like we had um, uh, there's one of my friends, Bharati. We always played together. I mean, at that time, streets were considered safe. And since we didn't have a park near us, we always played in the streets every day after school. And she played with us, but she could only play with us. There were lots of times when she couldn't play with us because there were 5 houses on the street that she worked in. 5.
Right. As
And
as domestic house help and
as,
child labor.
as a cleaner,
Right.
cleaning the floors, doing the dishes, fairly heavy work, for I don't know how old she was, 10, 11, not very old. Um, or there was a boy who was working in the garage who was also little, and I mean, that happens all the time. Boys happen in the work in garages and tea stalls, and girls work in homes. And we don't bat an eyelid because we've seen it always. So it feels like it's a normal
Yes.
and
Uh,
it's okay. But actually, it's not normal. It's not right. It's not okay.
Absolutely not right. And I'm very happy that you're speaking about this, because being born in a privileged home, and
Mhm.
yet having that empathy, because that empathy has gone missing in our world today, and the apathy has grown because everybody is waiting for some messiah to come and do something, without understanding that you need to give a little of yourself and a little of your effort to be the
Right.
change and make that change, right? So I would like you to actually elaborate on this, so that people who are watching and who think that they're entitled, and privileged because they have got some fancy education from some expensive school, should understand that empathy, and research shows that emotional intelligence, empathy, and learning to learn are the most essential skills of the future. So I'm very happy that you got inspired to do that work, but you've grown with these children at the same time you're growing up in a privileged home. So how is this thing about giving back, and you're not just giving money, right? That's what I mean by mindless arrogant charity. You're giving your time and your effort, because you even started this entire program with Save the Children, called For a Safe Tomorrow, where you are actually kind of taking care of 315 children, and
Right.
you're going to take this to its logical conclusion, because that's what you told me when we spoke initially. So tell us a little more about that work.
Yeah. So that one came out of the dual crisis of the second wave of COVID in India, as you know, that hit us really hard. And also in Bengal, especially in the remote coastal areas of Bengal, um, the cyclones, especially Cyclone Yas, uh, the ravages of the cyclones were enormous. So there were entire families that were whose homes were. There were countless children who lost at least one, often two of their parents, either to COVID or to Cyclone Yas. Um, they had all the schools were closed, so their usual lines of lifelines, like going to school, having a midday meal there, having the Anganwadi workers, having basic services, everything was cut off. I mean, there was no food, there was no food security, there was no education, there was not a safe home to live in, and most importantly, there was not a person taking care of them. They were suddenly without a guardian. They were completely left without protection, and this was such a crisis. This crisis is true across India, but it was biggest in West Bengal, in large part because it also got hit by Yas at the same time.
Right, right,
And so we also noticed that in this period, a lot of the indicators had uh, changed for the worse. So, to give you an example, child labor doubled
right,
within West Bengal in these few months of the pandemic.
right.
Uh, West Bengal has the second highest number of missing children in India. What's happening to those children? They're getting trafficked. Uh, the child marriage rate in West Bengal is really high. So more than two out of every five kids are are married. I mean, those are the official figures. We think it's much more than that. So are married before their legal age. So I mean, but it's natural. Obviously, if there's a food shortage, if there's economic distress, kids will find their way into the labor stream. You
Absolutely,
can't. It
absolutely.
happens. It shouldn't happen, but it happens. So what do? You need to give them the security that they need, so that doesn't happen, right? You need to bring them the security in a different way so that the families don't feel that we have to marry her off and that's the only way. That's one less mouth for us to feed, and at least it's that family's problem now, not our problem. I mean, these are the ways that the mind works when there is greater economic distress. So what do?
Absolutely,
You have to
absolutely.
counter that by saying this person is going to be safe with us. You will be safe with us. You will get your food. You will get your learning continuity. You will get a safe place to be in. You will get healthcare. You will even get, which is an area that we too often ignore in India, you will even get psychosocial support for you to deal with the trauma you faced of losing your parent or losing your home or losing your friends,
Right,
losing
right.
your school, losing, there's so much loss that
Absolutely.
happen in these young lives.
And the
So that,
biggest loss is the loss of dignity, you know, and
yeah,
it's, yes,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And so that is the thinking. And I really have to say, we did it very quickly. I mean, when the second wave hit and all of this was happening, I got in touch with SAVE and said that I would really like to set up a program to ensure the safety of these children who are the most vulnerable, the most at risk, and the most open to exploitation. And we were seeing them happen. And I wanted to do it quickly because you don't want takes so time to roll it out that by that time the children are already in the labor system or
right,
trafficked or married off, right? So because sometimes things in within NGOs or anywhere, just foundations take a long time. So that was a priority. And we did it very quickly. I mean, we started it on October, like the Girl Child Day. We planned it for a while, but we started the fundraising on Girl Child Day, and by the end of the year, it was on the ground. I mean, I went to visit the interiors of the Sundarbans in early January. I met the girls. I played with them. I read with them, danced with them, talked to them about all the ways in which they're stopping child marriage and child trafficking in their neighborhood. It was in their villages. It was really inspiring. I spoke with many of the affected families. In fact, that was the only thing. I had many items on my agenda for my trip to India, which I finally made after 2 years, including launching my mother's book on her birthday. But the only thing I was able to do actually because of Omicron was the trip to my Save the Children project. Everybody said don't do it, but there's no way I
yes,
was going to do it. So I did that anyway, because all of the frontline workers are out there doing it. So
right,
why
very
am I
true.
not able to do it? So that is the project, and I'm very, very proud of the way people across the world have responded to it,
Right,
uh, because it just confirms our our belief that we all stand in solidarity when the issue is as critical as children who are in trauma, right? The fact that
very
the
true.
world comes together and says, no, this we will back. um it was, and this is, we raised a lot more. I mean, uh we had an initial goal of raising 72 lakhs, and we raised 50 more. That's why we could increase the number of children whose lives we could safeguard
Right.
by 115. So yeah, so it's basically a sponsorship program for 315 kids, which is quite
And
impressive.
very inspiring, Nandana, that you chose to act rather than live in apathy. And I hope many people are inspired by your actions, and many
Yeah.
actors and celebrities like you who should also be inspired, because they can do so much work out there, and yet we only see apathy coming from people. During the pandemic, during the first lockdown, I must tell you, people staying in expensive apartment blocks in a place
Yeah.
called Gurgaon, where I stay,
Yeah.
where apartments cost you like, uh, 15 crores in Indian rupees. They fired their car cleaners and people working as domestic house help in the very, very first week. And this didn't only happen in India. This happened in New York. This happened in London, because the apathy is just grown, and people don't understand, how do these people fend for themselves? What are you paying them 1,500 rupees a month for cleaning your car, right? And rather than kind of choosing to do their own small bits and what they could do, there was absolutely no action. It was just a very few people who were there out on the streets as frontline workers, and most of them were the ordinary people. They were not the wealthy and the influential people, but
Ones
the
who had the
ordinary people.
resources to
Yeah,
do
yeah,
any
yeah.
what was needed, even if there was a
So
crisis,
it,
right?
it, it was the ordinary people who, with their resourcefulness, did a lot of work. I mean, Ruchira is one of them who, ran a huge program called 1millionmeals.org. And I know you also do a lot of work with Apne Aap to address
Yes.
trafficking,
Yes.
right? So I think I'm sure a lot of people will be inspired by your work. And from my side, I want to say thank you to you for being that inspiration and being the change. So from your work as an activist, I started writing books of real heroes, very ordinary people who are doing extraordinary work, like Lakshman Singh, who's a uh, boy who's never gone to school or college but has transformed over 500 villages from wastelands into wetlands in Rajasthan. Or Subhashini Mistry, who's from West Bengal again. And it's called the Karma Kari series. And I remember when I started writing the books, I was inspired by Dashrath Manji to start the Karmavir Awards to recognize unsung heroes, because most of your awards like the Padma Awards at that time when we started Karmovir in 2005 were only being given to people who could lobby for those awards. And on the other hand, you had the Red and White Bravery Awards and the Teachers Awards, which were given to people again who were influential and in the face. But the unsung ordinary heroes like Subhashini Mistry, who's a household domestic help, but has built a huge hospital today in West Bengal, which is a state-of-the-art hospital, or Lakshman Singh or Tulasi Munda, who's built a huge school in Kalahandi. They were not getting any recognition. So those are the stories I write in the Karma Kari, and I think of
It's
myself.
fascinating.
I think of myself as a historian for all these ordinary people who are doing extraordinary work and changing the world every day. And I seriously tell you, I
Love to
after
have a copy of your Kid Power one.
yes, Kid Power is all about children and
Yeah.
children who are from very underserved backgrounds, unserved backgrounds, who are giving back in a huge way to society. And I wrote that book where I said, let our children who think they're entitled learn from these children who are already giving back to
Yeah.
the world, right? So that was my inspiration. I wanted to be a historian for all these ordinary people. What is your inspiration when you started writing kids' books? What, what,
The
what?
kids, the
Yes.
kids, my first book, which is called Mambi and the Forest Fire, which then became a really successful like a successful book and has become a bestseller. Now it's becoming a series. But that one happened interestingly, when I lived in India. Now I moved back to New York, as you know, but when I lived in India, which I did for many years, I I did this going back to my identity as a playmate. I used to do these workshops with traumatized children, children who were rescued from the street or from trafficking, um, and or sometimes from institutions that had been abusive. And I would do these workshops with them, which were about just kind of expressing yourself through art, through music, through theater, through singing, through dancing. And it was always great. It was a way of the kids kind of coming together and breaking the ice and also having fun and being able to really own their emotions, represent them somehow, either through the painting that they did, even if it was an angry one, the colors were angry, or if it was a skit that they did about their frustration. Anyway, so I was doing one such workshop with this lovely children's home called Sneha, which is in Narendrapur in Kolkata. And these kids, usually the kids have so much to say that the challenge is to manage everybody and make sure that everybody's voice is heard, and that we make something and validate every voice. In this case, what happened weirdly was that the kids were all very, very shy. They didn't want to talk because somehow all of them felt, I'm talking about the book called Manvi and the Forest Fire, and all the kids somehow felt that the other kids did everything better, that the other kids would be better artists or better singers or better actors or better. So I would ask anybody and she would say, no, ask him, he's better. It was like that. Everybody was feeling very shy. So then I started on the spot, I created the character of this very shy monkey called Manvi, who was very kind and very smiley, but very shy, and wanted to be like her older, cooler jungle friends, didn't have a lot of confidence. But then as it turns out, when there's a forest fire, he's the one who is able to save all her friends. That's the story.
And I think
And
Mambi has huge potential to become a huge franchise.
thank you. I haven't thought enough about it. I should.
Right.
I've been asked about it from time to time.
Yeah.
So she then, but the kids basically created the characters, set set the forest on fire, made sure, Mambi. I just created the beginnings of a story, and then the kids kind of jumped in, and the way the story formed and they acted it out, they just kind of spontaneously fell into the play.
Right.
And by the play, I mean both the play as in playtime, but also the play as a piece of theater. They kind of spontaneously became actors and players. And So by the time I was done with it, I came out of the workshop, the story was very much, had very clearly taken shape. So the children have always inspired my work, always. I mean,
Very
it's
nice.
whether it's
Right.
the books I write or the work that I do as an advocate. I mean, the other book, there's a book that came out recently called In My Heart, which is about
Right.
adoption, but it's also about non-traditional family
It's all up
situation.
there on the slides. Yeah. In my heart.
That's right.
Yes.
That one I wanted to do because I had spent so much time working with institutionalized and homeless kids in India. We have 2 million kids living on the streets in India. And I had spent so much time, experiencing the helplessness that they live day to day, that I couldn't stop thinking about how dramatically their lives would be changed if, as a nation, we adopted more. There's so many kids who need adoption, so many families who
Absolutely.
want children.
And you have adopted a child yourself in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
2019.
My child is
Meghala is
very
adopted by
sweet,
you,
although
and
I'm so sorry she was not on her best behavior
no, no, no.
today.
I think that's fine. In fact, a lot of people on Facebook Live are saying that they got a life lesson from what she said. That I don't know what's making me upset, because there's so many times that we don't know what we are upset about. So for with your children's books, I mean, is there a process that you follow when you're writing the story? The process I follow is what Joseph Campbell calls as the hero's journey, right? And that's how I kind of build my plots and I build my characters, because my characters are mostly real heroes. So it's just about understanding what is the villain or the bad thing that they're fighting poverty, climate change, marginalization, casteism, and they are the heroes and the victims of their story, right? Whether it's a Dashrath Manji who cut an entire mountain with a hammer and a chisel, what is the process you follow? And the reason I'm asking you is there are many budding, aspiring writers who are watching, and we'll also be taking this, into schools tomorrow, and sharing it with schools for children who want to be writers tomorrow. So what is the process that you follow, and what is uh, the lessons on writing that you would want to share with all our young aspiring writers?
Um, I'll come to the process in a bit, but the
Okay.
most important lesson about writing is a very simple one, and it's one that I learned from my mother, which is to write every day. How
Right.
important it is to write every single day. And do I do it every day? No. But does it make a huge difference when I do? Yes, it does. So I don't think there's any lesson that's as important as that, because when you see yourself as a writer and you come, my mother, she called, if there was a day in which she didn't write a line, she called it a barren day,
Very
a waste.
nice. And I completely agree with her, because that's what I do. I write every day. I may scrap the the work I have written at the end of the day, but every day you have to write something so that,
Right.
yeah. So I
And
think
to
that's a great lesson for all
have that,
aspiring writers.
yeah.
Yes.
But in terms of the process is different, because I write so many different kinds of uh, texts and genres, right? So the process for poetry is very different.
Right.
Uh, the process for writing a children's book is very different. I mean, in fact, in some ways, the process for writing a children's book is, in a broad way, not dissimilar to the way you write a screenplay. So there's a beginning, there's a first act, there's a middle act, and there's a last act, and there's an inciting incident that starts off at the end of the first act, which pushes you into the second act, and then there's all the meat of the story, including the drama and the possible crisis, is in the second half, and then the resolution is in the third half. In the
Right.
sorry, second part, and the resolution is in the third part. So, but obviously, in when I write a screenplay, it's much, much, much more detailed. I'm thinking about, okay, on page 15 this needs to happen, on page 30 this needs to happen, on page 45 this, and 75. And I don't always follow it to the T like that, but I have that structure in my mind
Right. Right.
to guide me. With my children's books, I'm a little bit more free flowing within these first, second, third, act kind of structure. And I think the hero's journey actually features really well in screenplays. I think it
Right.
works brilliantly in screenplays, because usually screenplays are pushed by one protagonist, and that's a very helpful way to map that
Right.
journey. For essays, I have a different, I kind of spend a lot of time gathering my sources together and reading everything. So a
So
lot of it is reading, reading, reading,
you
reading.
conduct a lot of research and study before you start, and that's very important when you're writing nonfiction or self-help books. So
Yeah.
we actually kind of research 5,000 books and 25,000 papers, research papers on academia, ResearchGate, written by some of the finest minds, not just professors and people who've done their doctorates, but even aspiring doctorate students. So
Right.
any magic mantra for aspiring writers that you want to share, since you're a prolific writer who's written 6 children books and so many other books and
I
screenplays, of course.
Yeah, I think what I would say is that you should never throw away anything that you've written, even if you think it's crap.
Right.
Don't ever throw it away. Create a file for rejections, things that you have yourself rejected, but don't actually throw it in the bin, because there's you have no idea how
Absolutely, and I
often you can
completely
find
agree with you over
jewels in
there.
them. And you may go back to it 2 years later and say, wow, that I didn't say it right, I don't like the language in that, but the thought behind it gives me an idea for a great story. And I think that it's just so, I guess the basic thing is, don't be so hard on yourself. Even when you think that you've written something that's no good, there may well be a kind of kernel that is sparkling. There may be a hidden gem in there. So hold on to it and I think also trusting your instincts as a writer is very
Very
important.
important, very
Uh,
essential. Yes.
so sometimes just write, even if it doesn't sound right, but you feel that that's what you have to write, just write it all out. I mean, one thing that I think one mistake we make is that we think if I write this down, I'm somehow committing myself to it. And
Right.
it's not that. You don't think that, obviously, you don't think that rationally. You know, nobody's going to see it until you share it. Nobody's going to publish it until you send it for submit it. All of those facts, but just like writing it, the fact that it exists on paper somehow makes you feel like this is something that I have to claim responsibility for. No, you don't need to claim responsibility for it as a complete piece, until you want to, until you feel that it is complete. Until then, it's a work in progress. It's exploration.
Very true.
And and celebrate the exploration, embrace it.
Absolutely. You have to
uh,
explore ideas, you have to explore plots, you have to explore subplots, and absolutely keep exploring. So, what next in the writing space, Nandana? Are you working on any new books, screenplays? What are you working on now as a writer?
yeah, so I'm torn, because I have a number of projects that I've been asked to do, and I'm excited to do. I can't do all of them at once. I need to make a decision. They're all very attractive in different ways. I'm late on two of my children's books, the second one being the second in the Mambi series, which
Right.
is the book I was going to write in 2020, instead of which I ended up doing Acrobat, because honestly, that was the only book I was able to concentrate on, having just lost my mother. So I'm late on that. I'm late on another children's book called Part of Me, which is also about adoption, but for an American audience. So it's a different it is a different book. I am been asked to do a book on 3 generations of Bengali women poets. So a kind of fictionalized history of my family, which I think would be fascinating, but it's a big project and there's a lot of research I would need to do for it. Interestingly, that's a project that my mother and I had thought of doing together
Right.
when she
Right.
was alive, and had sort of almost started working on it together one summer. And so and it's called Mother Tongues. We had even chosen the title together. That's one project. Another project that I've been approached for, which I'm fascinated by, although again it's very ambitious, is, I mean, I feel very blessed that people have loved my translations of my mother's poetry, and have loved the fact that, because my mother loved rhymes so much, that all the poems that she wrote in rhyme, I have I have translated into rhyme. And I've kept the structure, the rhythmic structures of her poems. It's not easy to do that from Bengali to
Right.
English. I've done that as
So
much
you
as
you you
possible.
you you
Yeah,
maintain the meter, you're saying.
exactly. I maintain the meter as well as the rhyme. And also the way the poem looks on the page, like the way it takes up space, because when you read, that also affects the way it creates meaning, the
Right.
way it inhabits space. So all of those things. Anyway, so after that, it was suggested to me that I should consider doing a translation of Tagore's songs as songs, because they haven't been translated as songs. They've been translated as poems,
This is the Rabindra Gan.
Robindra Sangit. Yeah,
Rabindra
basically,
Sangit, yeah.
yeah. From Gito Bitan, many of those songs are actually in Gitanjali.
Right.
I mean,
In the bouquet of poems, yeah.
in his Gitanjali, but they haven't necessarily been translated as songs. They're translated as beautiful poems or hymns. But the idea here is to make, because in Bengali his songs are deeply powerful, um, but and profound with a kind of simplicity. The
Right.
language is very simple. It's household language, which is why you have Tagore songs in every Bengali household, where anytime anything happens to you, a Tagore song comes to your mind,
Right.
right? You express it instead of a thought that comes to you. It's a line of Tagore song, Tagore Rabindra Sangit that comes to you, because the language is so simple and effortless. Whereas in the translations, it's always that exist. It's always not like that.
Right.
So the idea was to do like a Tagore, Rabindra Tagore songbook, where I would translate his songs as songs, so much so that, and this was a very interesting experiment, that they could perhaps be sung with the original tunes.
Wow. Brilliant. And
So
I think
other
that's another great lesson for aspiring writers. Keep it simple, keep it succinct. Yeah, you don't need to use big words and baffle the audience. Keep it simple where even a 12-year-old can understand it. And I think that's a great lesson, Nandana. So Nandana, coming back to your book, Acrobat,
Mhm.
right? And this is the final segment now where we talk more about Acrobat because this is your newest book. And one of the poems that I kind of liked and it touched me is the title poem, Acrobat. Do you want to read it out for the audience and then tell us what is your mom trying to say over here?
Sure, I'd love
Right,
to.
because that's a very powerful, only once in your life will the rope shiver, right? And there is I'm sure there's a profound thought behind that.
Yeah, and there's a profound thought behind that. There's also an interesting history in the context of our book, which I'll tell you.
Right.
Shall I read it in Bangla first?
Sure, please go ahead.
Because it's short. Madari. ভেবেছে সে বুঝি খুব সুন্দর মাদারি খেলা জানে, দুহাতে সময়কে নিয়ে লোফালুফি, এখন তখন দুটোই নাচাবে দুমুঠোতে, হেঁটে যাবে দড়ির ওপরে, ভেবেছে সে সব কিছু পারে, জীবনে একবারই শুধু দড়ি কেঁপে ওঠে. She knew she thought acrobatics rather well, that she could juggle time with both hands, play with the now right next to the then. She would make both dance, she thought, fist to fist, and she would glide so smooth along the tight rope. She thought she could do absolutely anything at all. Only once in your life will the rope shiver. So when I translated this, I actually translated it not for Acrobat, but for this book called Make Up Your Mind, which was a translation of my mother's book, Tumi Monosthir Koro. And I did a translation of that book as a surprise birthday present for her 75th birthday. Now, because this was going to be a surprise, I couldn't consult with her on any of the translations. So, in Bengali, the third person singular is not gender specific. It's she, whereas in English you have to choose between he and she, right?
Right.
So I could ask her what her choice would have been. But to me, this poem had always seemed to be about the precarious multitasking that every woman has to do
Right.
to survive. So I chose to translate it in that direction, and I chose she. And once the book came out, I gave it to her and I asked her. She loved it. She loved the book. I asked her about this poem and I said, did I make the right choice? Were you thinking that your protagonist was a woman when you? And to my surprise, she said, actually, I wasn't thinking at all about gender when I wrote this poem, because for me, this poem is about the delicate balancing act that every poet has to go through.
Right.
Because a word too uh, a word too heavy or a sentence too long can throw you off the rope as a poet.
Right.
So when she said that, it was stunning. It made absolute sense. And was a surprise to me. And I said, "Oh, Ma, let me rework the poem then so that it reflects that." And she said, "No, absolutely not. I love the way you've interpreted the poem as a feminist poem because it works beautifully as that. So I wouldn't change a word." Um, and she talked about how translation, in any case, was a recreation and a reinterpretation of the original words, and that a translated text becomes a newborn text. And I kept thinking about those words of hers when I translated this book, because again, I found myself in a situation where I couldn't ask her about her intentions as a poet, nor could I ask her about my choices as a translator, right? So that conversation kept coming back to me.
Very nice.
And we
And
chose and we chose it as the title of this book
yes, I was going to ask you that next. What is the reason that you chose this as the title of the book?
because of these, and we chose it together. We signed the book 2 weeks before she died, and
Okay.
she was thrilled that the book was coming out. She said, "I'm
Right.
definitely going to stick around for this one because this was her first book, even though she had 100 books to her credit. This was her first book to be published for an international audience." So
Super.
she was super excited about it. Um, so we thought about a few other titles like Right Now Forever, which is another title of one of her poems. And
Right.
um, there were a few other titles that we really liked. But then Acrobat was the one that we both um, zoned in on because we felt that it worked, that the book that it worked well for this book, because the book was as much about the multiple identities of a woman as it was about maintaining the balance and craft of poetry of a poet. So we felt that it worked in both of the interpretations that my mother had and I had.
Super. And there are a few other poems which actually touched me, including the growing up lesson and
I think
change,
that's
because, as a transformation coach, I always say, I change to change the nation, I change to change society, I change to change the world, I change to change it, change everyone, I change to change everything. And it so beautifully kind of, brings that out in this very short poem by her. Coming up to the final poem, which really touched me from the book, is In Poetry, and over there she talks about legacy, because as long as I live in poetry, what would your legacy be? That you want to leave behind as Nandana, the individual, Nandana, the human being. What do you think is the legacy that you choose to leave behind? Besides all the work that you're doing as an activist, etc., what would you like to be remembered by?
The truth is, I've never thought of that. um, I do the work that I do because that's the only thing because I feel compelled to do it, because I'm passionate about it. All the work I've ever done in my life has been uh, connected to how strongly I felt about the issues, whether they were films or books or my advocacy work. So, I don't, I think if anything, I would want my work to create a legacy of respect, of respecting each other, of respecting differences. Um, which is what I think currently is a huge crisis in the world, is we don't respect each other's differences. And it's whether,
Absolutely,
whether
absolutely.
it's between races, whether it's between religions, whether it's between men and women, whether it's,
Yes.
between
It's
the
it,
right
and I,
wing and the left wing. It's just there is I would love there to be, and legacy is a grand word. So I would, if my work can somehow reach to lead to a greater sense of solidarity between individuals who want similar and great things for the world, uh, because I see there's so many steps back that happen
absolutely,
because of
absolutely.
these differences, which are really immaterial. They're so inconsequential, but we are not able to put them behind us.
Right.
So if we can be a legacy of
Yes.
respecting each other's differences,
Of
I think.
creating oneness, of being human. And I completely hear you, and I'm with you, and we are on the same page, because that divisiveness is surely being felt around the world, and more so in our country, because the state and the government is actually promoting that divisiveness and polarizing people, and actually kind of insulting the entire way our constitution was written and should have been practiced, right? So I'm completely with you, and I think that's the biggest legacy that one can leave behind, about how can you kind of teach people to live the religion of humanity rather than belonging to some religion, some caste. I've never understood how people can even think in this era about somebody being of a lower caste, and it really appalls me when educated people think like that. I'm like, seriously, you went to school and college? I mean, how does that work? Anyway, thank
But
you so much for
the culture, it sounds what I was going to say, but it sounds very wishy-washy, which is why I didn't say that.
yeah.
Is that it would be lovely if if all our legacy, if we could all together create a legacy of love and not of hate.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because right
It's not
now,
it's not
we have a
wishy-washy at
legacy.
all. I would say that that is the need of the hour. It is the need of the day. And I think that everyone should realize that, because even if you follow some or the other religion, every religion teaches you love and humanity. So where is this hatred coming in from?
Mm.
Right? Because in the name of religion, we seem to be divided and hating each other. With that, I would like you to read, to kind of conclude the session, read one more poem if you want to. I have like acrobat over here, I have change, and I have shame, and then I have the growing up lesson, which I think you can read out if you want, or you can read
Sure, I'd love
another
to.
another poem which is close to you from the book, whatever you want to read out. And then, of course, I read the very touching letter that you wrote to your mom, and which is at the end of the book. And I would like you to kind of, share an excerpt from that letter for the audience to listen into. I think it's the it's the grief of a daughter mourning her mom. So I would like you to read out from that letter also. Yes.
I'd love to read that. Why don't I read Growing Up Lesson? I mean, I love all the poems that you've selected. So
Please also show your book to the audience.
I had asked Jerry to curate the poems because of course I have my favorites, but he ended up choosing ones that I really love. The reason why I'm going to Growing Up Lesson is because it's a story that it's a poem that's addressed to a boy, and a lot of her poems are addressed to girls, including the ones we read before,
Right.
both Puppet, which was addressed to me in a way, and to herself, and Acrobat, which we've discussed, but I see it as a poem about a woman, about womanhood. This one is about the complexity of gender identity, and also something that she wrote about frequently, which is the violence that uh, lurks behind language. The
Right.
fact that language has great freeing potential, but it can also be very destructive. So I think so. It talks about the power and the destructiveness of words. So I'll read that. Can I bring that? Can you bring that up again here so I can
Sure,
read it?
sure. Please also show your book to the audience. I mean, hold
Okay.
your book up. Yes, yeah.
Yes, this is my book.
Right. Please, a request to everybody in the audience who's watching, please do go and buy the book. It's on Amazon, and it's also at your favorite bookstores. It's published by Juggernaut in India, Juggernaut Publishing. So
Yes.
yes,
Big
Nandana.
thank you to Juggernaut Books and Chiki for making such a beautiful book out of this. So yeah, please do buy it. And then let me know which poems are your favorites. Share my email ID and my social media and all of that afterwards, Jerry.
Surely, surely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then the other reason why I like this poem also, because the other poems I wrote to you were not in rhyme. This has a very particular rhyming and metrical scheme, which I completely followed. So it gives you a sense of that kind of a poetry. Growing up lesson. Boy, are you scared of bloodshed? Are you terrified of plucking virginity? If the taste of blood goes to your head, do you fear that it will be a calamity? The truth is, whether wrong or right, your blood calls out to you each night. Listen, boy, it's time for you to grow. Words can be as fierce, don't you know? The treachery that lingers on tongue tips, beyond the world that all your dreams show. Know that blood can be easily shed by lips.
Beautiful. And I think the poem again has got a lot of deep meaning, and is saying a lot, including about how one has to respect women, and I think one of the things which I keep saying in India is that, if you want to stop crimes against women in India, we need to teach men how to respect women, because it's not about pulling doors or pulling chairs back. It's about having deep respect for women, and more than that, more than teaching men how to respect women, I always say we have to teach women how to respect women, because you have huge cases of female feticide in this country. You have female infanticide in this country, and you do a lot of work with the girl child, Nandana. So you know what I'm talking
Those
about.
areas as well, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for reading that out. And to conclude, this letter really touched me, and I could feel the grief, and I could feel you mourning your mom. And I like the fact that you started with a thought by Maya Angelou, who did write a small endorsement for my first Karma Kari book also. So over to you. Tell us more about the letter. What moved you to write this letter? And if you want to read out an excerpt from the letter before we conclude.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out what would be, what would be of cutting it short. So this is a letter that I started writing to my mother on her 75th birthday. And then it kept growing. I would write to her on every birthday, and it kind of grew as a letter. I completed it only after she died. So she's seen most of it, but not all of it. And she loved it. She was very sweet. As I said, my mother was completely uninhibited about her crying and her laughing and her scolding. And when we did any sessions on her poetry together, she always asked me to read this because she loved hearing it. And every time I would read it out, she would always get all teary, which was just so sweet. I mean, just the innocence that she had of being able to embrace that intimacy in public was stunning. Okay, here goes. A letter to Ma. It is true I was created in you. It is also true that you were created for me. Maya Angelou. My first semester in college, you arrived in between your conferences, suitcases and admirers in tow, refusing abundant of offers of hospitality in Cambridge. You shared and immediately redecorated the 1.5 rooms assigned to my 2 roommates and me. Every morning, you stood in line in our noisy dormitory to claim your 3 minutes in the shower. You preferred the modern steel and glass shower stalls opposite our room to the quieter, more old-fashioned bathroom down the hall. You left after a week, just as I was getting used to finding your hip-length hair in my comb and turning every head in the 1,000-strong Harvard Union, where you swept into dinner with me, gliding in like a queen, like you always did. A few weeks later, we hit midterm exams. I overslept the first day, found the showers occupied, and sprinted to the other bathroom in panic. As I stumbled onto freezing tiles and fiddled with the cranky knob that spurted cold water for red and boiling for blue, something miraculously familiar caught my eye. A crimson dot of velvet on the narrow gray wall. your well-traveled bindi, carefully transported from your forehead and placed beyond reach of the spray. In a flash, I could hear you laugh and smell your scent. I could feel the tension in my neck melt into the mist surrounding me. That perfect circle of red gave evidence on that mildewed wall that you would always be there, far away, so close. Although there were unending demands on your time, a few years ago you had somehow managed to find several days for us to translate together my bedtime book for children, Not Yet. This book, this one actually, this book is a playful dialogue in rhyme between a mother and child. A naughty little girl finds countless excuses not to go to bed, while her ever patient mother is determined to put her to sleep. The literal Bengali translation of Not Yet is Akonina. But you had laughed your own little girl laugh and declared, no, the girl must be much more emphatic. She will say, Ekunina, Ekunina. Well, this obstinate daughter of yours kept saying to her mother in the last few days, Ekunina, Ekunina. Could you hear me, Ma? Well, Ma, I've grown up a bit. My world has grown up a lot. I left home as a child and made beautiful friends who became my family. In my work, I've met many beautiful faces, walked with beautiful figures. I've fallen in love with beautiful minds. You grew up too. More books published, many awards won. A few more clashes with your stubbornly loving daughters. Around your eyes, a few more lines celebrating years of full-throated life. More world tours, many with me, when you swept me away with your infectious appetite for discovery, your limitless sense of wonder. Remember that list we made some years ago of unvisited countries that you absolutely had to explore? Wheelchair in tow, we made it to most entries on that list, including China, Egypt, and South Africa, but not Burma. Each time we traveled, you transformed our adventures into provocative essays or best-selling books. And on every trip, we shared even more pleasures together than our plentiful arguments. Yes, we did have fights. I cried when you didn't understand. I begged you not to nag. I yelled at you when I was upset with someone else. I watched in panic as tears welled up in your ever adolescent eyes. But I'm as sure today as I was that night in London that even if you had not been my mother, even if that most precious accident of birth had by rights been the beginning of someone else's story, even if I'd met you in any of your other roles as a poet, professor, painter, friend, or a stranger on a plane, you would still be the most beautiful person I could ever have met. At the end of Not Yet, the daughter asks, Ma, did you turn out the light? And the mother replies, yes, my dear. Now, good night.
So very soul-stirring, heart-touching, great tribute to your mom. And with that, we'll conclude this session. Nandana, thank you so much for making the time to share your thoughts, share your ideas, share about your life, share about your mom, share about everything that you shared with your mom in with absolute candor. And thank you so much for for all those great life lessons and insights and ideas for action, which I'm sure will benefit several people in the audience. My appeal to everybody in the audience, please do go and buy the book. It's a tribute by a daughter to her mother. And it has some beautiful poems which have surely touched me, and I'm sure they'll touch you too. The poems are laced with life lessons, and they will kind of inspire you at many levels. So please do go and buy the book. The book is called Acrobat, published by Juggernaut Publishing in India, and written and translated by Nandana Sen, poems by her mother, Nabanita Dev Sen. So thank you, Nandana. And for the audience who wants to reach out to Nandana and give her feedback on the book, she's available at nandanasen@gmail.com. Nandana Sen, NANDANASEN @gmail.com, and by the same name, Nandana Dev Sen, at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So thank you so much, Nandana.
So on email, it's nandanasen@gmail.com.
Right.
And on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it's at Nandana Dev Sen.
Right.
So there's a DEV, and then on LinkedIn, it's Nandana Sen again.
Nandana Sen.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you so much, and thank you for the great conversation. I really learned a lot from the conversation, some brilliant thoughts that you shared over there, right from the descriptors to all the poems and the thoughts and the insights that you shared. So thank you, Nandana. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Lovely conversation with you, and I'm really looking forward to reading Weekends with Zoe and the book about the
and I'll write to you separately, because I would love to include some of the poems that are written by you and translated by you, written by your mom. If I can take one or two poems for Weekends with Zoe, because we packed the book with a lot of poems which are written by old poets and some young poets, including our co-founder Itu Chopra, who's a poet herself. So thank you so much, and I'll write separately to you on that. Thank you. Namaste, and have a great day.
Take care.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Great week.
Bye.